Welcome to Sleepy Philosophy, where big questions meet gentle exploration. Tonight, we're drifting into one of the most quietly profound puzzles that philosophy has ever offered us. It's a question that touches everything from the cells in your body to the memories in your mind, from the ship you might sail tomorrow to the person you were yesterday. Before we begin this calm journey into the nature of identity and change, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of existence. There's something wonderfully fitting about exploring questions of continuity and change while this sleepy community spans across time zones, each of us a slightly different version of who we were when we woke up this morning. If you find these gentle philosophical wanderings helpful for rest or reflection, a quiet tap on the like button helps more sleepy souls find their way here. And if you'd like to join us for more midnight musings about life's deeper questions, consider subscribing to Sleepy Philosophy. We'll be here whenever you need a soft place to land with your thoughts. So settle in, let your thoughts soften at the edges, and let's begin with a story that's been troubling philosophers for over 2,000 years. A story about a ship, a hero, and a question that might change how you see everything around you, including yourself. Picture ancient Athens, where the warm Mediterranean sun glints off the harbour waters. There, moored at the dock, sits a magnificent ship. This isn't just any vessel, it's the ship that carried the legendary Theseus and the young people of Athens back from Crete, after he slayed the Minotaur and escaped the labyrinth. The ship is more than wood and sail, it's a symbol, a piece of living history that the Athenians treasure. But ships, like all things, age. The salt air gnaws at the wood, storms batter the hull, and time works its patient magic of decay. So the Athenians, wanting to preserve this sacred vessel, begin to replace its parts. First, a rotted plank here, then a frayed rope there. A new mast when the old one weakens, fresh sails when the originals grow thin as gossip. Year after year, decade after decade, they continue this careful maintenance. Each replacement is made with love and precision, ensuring the ship remains seaworthy and beautiful. And here's where our puzzle begins to take shape, like morning mist gathering on still water. After many years of this gradual replacement, a curious question arises. If every single part of the ship has been replaced, every plank, every rope, every nail, is it still the same ship? Is this vessel, now composed entirely of new materials, still truly the Ship of Theseus? At first glance you might think, of course it is. It looks the same, serves the same purpose, sits in the same harbour. The Athenians still call it the Ship of Theseus, still honour it as the vessel that brought their hero home. Surely a thing is more than just the sum of its physical parts. But wait, let's complicate our gentle puzzle just a bit more. Imagine that some thoughtful person has been collecting all those original parts as they were removed. The rotted planks were carefully stored, the frayed ropes preserved, the worn sails folded away. And now this collector decides to reassemble all these original pieces into a ship. Every component is authentically from the original vessel that Theseus sailed. Now we have two ships, one in the harbour, made entirely of new parts, but maintaining perfect continuity of form and function. Another, perhaps in a warehouse, made entirely of the original parts, but having experienced a break in its existence as a complete ship. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? This is the puzzle that has captivated minds from ancient Greece to modern philosophy departments, from late-night dorm room discussions to the quiet moments before sleep, when our minds wander to life's deeper mysteries. It seems simple enough, almost like a riddle you might pose to a child, yet it opens up questions so profound they touch the very nature of identity, continuity, and what it means for anything to remain the same over time. The ancient philosopher Plutarch first recorded this puzzle, though the questions it raises had likely been troubling thoughtful minds long before he put stylus to wax. What Plutarch understood, and what keeps this puzzle alive after all these centuries, is that it's never really been about ships at all. It's about us. Think about your own body for a moment. Scientists tell us that most of the cells in your body replace themselves regularly. Your skin cells renew every few weeks, your liver cells every few months. Even your bone cells, which seem so permanent, are constantly being broken down and rebuilt. Over the course of 7 to 10 years, the vast majority of the physical matter that makes up your body will have been replaced. So are you the same person you were 7 years ago, 10 years ago? What makes you, you, if not the physical substance of your being. The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider our minds. Your thoughts today are different from your thoughts yesterday. Your memories shift and change, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Your beliefs evolve, your knowledge grows, your perspectives mature. The person reading these words is, in countless ways, different from the person who woke up this morning, let alone the person who existed years ago. Yet something persists. Something that makes you recognize yourself in old photographs, even when everything from your appearance to your worldview has changed. Something that creates a continuous thread of identity running through the constantly changing fabric of your existence. This is what makes the Ship of Theseus more than just an ancient brain teaser. It's a mirror in which we can examine our own nature, our own continuity, our own relationship with change and permanence. Different philosophers have approached this puzzle from different angles, each offering their own gentle wisdom about the nature of identity. Some argue that continuity of form and function matters most. If something looks the same, behaves the same, and serves the same purpose, then it remains essentially the same thing, regardless of whether its parts have been replaced. This view finds comfort in patterns and relationships rather than substances. Just as a river remains a river, even though the water flowing through it is constantly changing, a thing remains itself as long as its essential pattern persists. The ship in the harbour, they would argue, is the true Ship of Theseus because it maintains the form, function, and continuity of the original. Others take a different path, arguing that identity lies in the physical substance itself. These philosophers might say that the reassembled ship, made from all the original parts, has the stronger claim to being the true Ship of Theseus. After all, these are the actual pieces of wood that Theseus touched, the very ropes he pulled, the authentic sails that caught the wind on that legendary voyage home. Still others suggest that both ships, or perhaps neither ship, can claim to be the true Ship of Theseus. Maybe identity isn't as simple as we'd like it to be. Maybe things can have multiple valid identities, or perhaps the very concept of a single, unchanging identity is an illusion we create to make sense of a world that's constantly in flux. There's something deeply comforting about exploring these questions in the quiet hours. During the day, we rarely pause to consider such matters. We're too busy being ourselves, living our lives, assuming our continuity without question. But in these gentle moments before sleep, when the world slows down and our minds have space to wander, we can afford to question even our most basic assumptions about identity and existence. The Ship of Theseus invites us to consider that perhaps change and continuity aren't opposites, but partners in a slow dance. Perhaps what makes something real and persistent isn't its resistance to change, but its ability to change while maintaining something essential, something recognizable, something that continues to matter. Think of a melody. The individual notes come and go, each one existing for just a moment before fading into silence. Yet the melody itself persists, recognizable and meaningful, created not by any single note but by the relationship between them, the pattern they create together. When you hum that melody later, using entirely different sound waves in entirely different moments, is it the same melody? Most of us would say yes without hesitation. Perhaps this is closer to how identity actually works. Perhaps we are more like melodies than like ships, more like rivers than like rocks. Perhaps what makes us who we are isn't any particular collection of parts, but the pattern they create, the song they sing together, the story they tell. But even this musical metaphor raises new questions. If I change the key of a melody, is it still the same song? If I slow it down or speed it up, add instruments or strip them away, at what point does it become something different? These aren't just abstract puzzles. They're questions we face every day as we navigate the changes in ourselves and in the people we love. Consider your oldest friendship. The person you call your best friend today is, in countless ways, different from the person you first met years ago. Their interests have evolved, their appearance has changed, their knowledge has grown, they've experienced joys and sorrows that have shaped them, made decisions that have altered their path. In what sense are they the same person you originally befriended? Yet something persists in that relationship, some thread of continuity that makes you recognize them not just as familiar, but as fundamentally the same person you've always known. This recognition goes deeper than mere habit or convenience. It touches something essential about how we understand identity and connection. The Ship of Theseus doesn't just ask us to think about identity, it asks us to feel our way into it. When you imagine those Athenian craftsmen carefully removing each worn plank and replacing it with fresh wood, what's your intuition? Does something important get lost in that process, or is something valuable preserved? When you picture that warehouse where someone has painstakingly reassembled all the original parts, what do you sense? Does this feel like resurrection? Like the return of something that was lost? Or does it feel like an exercise in nostalgia, a beautiful but ultimately hollow recreation of something whose time has passed? These aren't merely intellectual exercises we're working through in the quiet darkness. They're invitations to explore the very foundation of how we relate to ourselves and our world. The Ship of Theseus puzzle has a way of following us into our daily lives, appearing in moments when we least expect it. Perhaps you've experienced this while looking through old photo albums. There you are at age 5, grinning toothlessly at the camera. There you are at 15, awkward and hopeful. At 25, confident and uncertain in equal measure. The faces in these photographs share your name, your basic features, even some of your mannerisms, yet each one seems almost like a stranger. Which one is the real you? Are they all equally valid versions of your identity, or are some more authentic than others? The puzzle deepens when we consider not just physical change, but transformation of character and belief. The person who believed passionately in certain political ideas 20 years ago, who held firm religious convictions, who was certain about their career path, their relationships, their place in the world, that person may have evolved into someone with entirely different perspectives. Their core values may have shifted, their understanding of right and wrong refined or revolutionized. If you met your past self today, would you recognize them as fundamentally the same person? Or would they seem like someone you used to know well but have since grown apart from? More intriguingly, which version would have the stronger claim to being the real you, the authentic self? This question becomes even more poignant when we consider the people we love. Parents watching their children grow up face a version of the Ship of Theseus puzzle every day. The infant they held, the toddler who took their first steps, the teenager who challenged every assumption, the adult who builds their own life, these are all the same person. Yet they're also fundamentally different beings, each stage so distinct that sometimes it's hard to find the connecting thread. When a parent says, "I miss the little boy you used to be," are they mourning the loss of their actual child, or simply acknowledging that growth requires leaving certain versions of ourselves behind? When they look at their adult child and say, "You haven't changed a bit," what deeper truth about continuity are they recognizing? The Ship of Theseus also illuminates our relationship with places and communities. Consider the neighborhood where you grew up. Perhaps the houses have been renovated, the shops have changed hands, the families have moved away and been replaced by new ones. The very landscape may have been altered, trees cut down, new buildings erected, streets widened or rerouted. Is it still the same place? When you return to visit, what are you actually returning to? The physical location may share the same coordinates on a map, but if everything visible has changed, if the people and culture have evolved beyond recognition, in what sense is it the same neighborhood? Yet something often feels familiar, something deeper than the surface changes. Perhaps it's the way the light falls at certain times of day, the particular quality of the air, the underlying rhythm of life that persists despite all transformations. Maybe what makes a place itself isn't its buildings, or even its people, but something more subtle, something that exists in the relationships between things rather than in the things themselves. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of the Ship of Theseus, the question of what philosophers call essential properties. What makes something what it is? What aspects of a thing are so fundamental that removing or changing them would make it into something else entirely? For the ship, is it the wood that Theseus touched? The shape that cut through the Mediterranean waters? The purpose it served in bringing the hero home? The memories and stories it carries? The continuity of its existence as a single, persistent object? Each answer seems reasonable, yet each leads to different conclusions about which ship, if either, deserves to be called the true Ship of Theseus. This isn't a flaw in the puzzle, it's the puzzle's greatest gift. It shows us that identity itself might be more flexible, more contextual, more dependent on perspective than we typically assume. In our daily lives, we usually operate with what philosophers call naive realism. We assume that things simply are what they are, that identity is obvious and unchanging. The coffee cup on your nightstand is a coffee cup, period. You are you obviously and permanently. The tree outside your window is the same tree it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. But the Ship of Theseus gently suggests that this certainty might be more fragile than we imagine. It invites us to consider that identity could be something we construct, something we agree upon, rather than something we simply discover. Think about how this applies to institutions and organizations. A company that has completely changed its products, its employees, its location, its ownership, and its mission, is it still the same company? What about a sports team that has replaced every player, coach, and even moved to a different city? What makes it continuous with its past incarnations? These questions matter because they affect how we understand loyalty, tradition, and commitment. When we pledge allegiance to something, are we committing to its current form, to its essential nature, or to whatever it might become through change? When we honor the past, are we celebrating specific arrangements of matter and energy, or are we recognizing patterns and relationships that transcend their physical embodiments? The Ship of Theseus also speaks to our relationship with our own memories and experiences. The event you remember from childhood, filtered through decades of reflection, retelling, and reinterpretation, is it the same event that actually occurred? Your memory of it has certainly changed. The meaning you derive from it has evolved. Even the neural pathways that store it have been rebuilt countless times. Yet it remains your memory, part of your personal history, a building block of your identity. When you tell stories about your past, you're not just recounting facts, you're actively reconstructing your sense of self. Each telling is both a preservation and a transformation, keeping the past alive by allowing it to change. This dynamic relationship between preservation and transformation appears throughout human culture. Traditional songs that have been passed down through generations, with each singer adding their own interpretation while maintaining the essential melody and meaning. Classic stories retold in new contexts, updated for contemporary audiences while preserving their core wisdom. Languages that evolve constantly yet maintain enough continuity for speakers separated by centuries to potentially understand each other. Perhaps this is what the Ship of Theseus is really teaching us, that continuity and change aren't opposing forces but collaborating partners in the dance of existence. Things persist not by remaining static, but by changing in ways that preserve what matters most while adapting to new circumstances. This perspective offers a different way of thinking about loss and transformation. When someone you love changes in fundamental ways, perhaps through illness, trauma, or simply the natural evolution of life, the Ship of Theseus suggests that the question isn't whether they're still the same person, but rather how their essential nature persists through and is expressed in their new form. When we ourselves go through major life transitions, career changes, spiritual awakenings, or personal crises that seem to shake the very foundations of who we are, we might find comfort in recognizing that transformation and continuity can coexist. We can become genuinely new while remaining authentically ourselves. The puzzle also invites us to consider what we mean when we talk about authenticity. In a world where everything changes, what does it mean to be true to yourself? If the self is constantly evolving, which version should you be true to? Your past self with their particular dreams and limitations, your present self with their current understanding and circumstances, your future self with their unknown potential and possibilities? Maybe authenticity isn't about loyalty to any particular version of yourself, but rather about honoring the continuous process of becoming that connects all your various selves across time. Maybe being authentic means embracing change while maintaining awareness of the deeper patterns and purposes that give your life coherence and meaning. This brings us to one of the most beautiful aspects of the Ship of Theseus puzzle, its invitation to practice a kind of philosophical mindfulness. In our busy days, we rarely pause to notice the constant subtle changes happening all around us and within us. We take identity for granted, assuming it's stable and obvious. But when we slow down, especially in these quiet nighttime hours, we can begin to appreciate the miracle of continuity within change. We can notice how our breath changes from moment to moment while remaining recognizably our breath. How our thoughts shift and flow while maintaining our particular style of thinking. How the world around us transforms constantly while still feeling like home. The Ship of Theseus doesn't demand that we solve its puzzle definitively. Instead, it offers us a lens through which to view the world with greater wonder and less certainty. It suggests that the questions we ask about identity and change might be more valuable than any final answers we might discover. As you lie there in the darkness, feeling your body settle into rest, you might notice that you're already living the Ship of Theseus puzzle. The person who began listening to these words is not quite the same person hearing them now. Your thoughts have shifted, your understanding has evolved. Your physical body has continued its constant process of renewal and repair. Yet here you are, continuous with yourself, recognizable to yourself, still fundamentally you despite all the microscopic changes occurring each moment. You're both the same and different, both permanent and temporary, both the original ship and the restored vessel. Perhaps there's something profound in this recognition that we are, each of us, living paradoxes of persistence and change. The Ship of Theseus doesn't just describe an ancient puzzle about wooden planks and bronze fittings. It describes the fundamental condition of existence itself, the way everything that matters to us exists in this strange space between being and becoming. Consider for a moment the relationships that define your life, the friendship that began in childhood, but has weathered decades of separation, reunion, misunderstanding, and growth. Is it the same friendship? The trust you share now has been tested and renewed countless times. The shared memories have been revisited, reinterpreted, sometimes corrected by time's gentle editing. The people within that friendship have become almost entirely different beings, yet something essential persists. Something that makes you smile when their name appears on your phone. Something that allows you to pick up conversations as if no time has passed at all. Or think about the creative works that have shaped you. The book you read at 16 that changed your perspective on life. When you return to it at 40, you find it's somehow become a different book entirely. New passages leap out as significant, while others that once seemed profound now feel naive or incomplete. Yet it's undeniably the same text, the same arrangement of words on pages. What's changed isn't the book, but the reader. Or perhaps both have changed together, the book becoming new through your new eyes, you becoming new through the book's persistent wisdom. This dance between constancy and transformation appears in the most mundane moments of daily life. The morning coffee ritual that has remained unchanged for years, yet carries different meanings as you age, as your relationships evolve, as your understanding of pleasure and routine deepens. The same motions, the same ceramic mug perhaps, but an entirely different experience each time, layered with new associations and coloured by accumulated experience. The Ship of Theseus suggests that we might be approaching these questions from the wrong angle entirely. Instead of asking whether something remains the same despite change, perhaps we should ask how sameness and change can coexist. How identity might be less about static properties and more about dynamic relationships, less about what something is and more about what it does, how it connects, what it means. This shift in perspective can be surprisingly liberating. If identity isn't fixed, if continuity doesn't require unchangingness, then growth becomes not a threat to authenticity, but its fullest expression. The person you're becoming isn't betraying the person you've been, but fulfilling their deepest potential. The changes in your beliefs, your values, your understanding aren't departures from your true self, but discoveries of aspects of that self you hadn't yet encountered. Think about how this applies to the stories we tell about our lives. The narrative of who you are, where you came from, what you've learned. These stories necessarily change as you gain new experiences and perspectives. Details that once seemed crucial fade in importance, while moments that barely registered at the time reveal themselves as turning points. The same events get woven into different patterns, creating different meanings, supporting different understandings of who you are and where you're headed. Yet something persists through all these retellings, some essential thread that makes your story recognizably yours. Perhaps what makes a life story authentic isn't its factual accuracy or its consistency, but its honesty about the process of becoming, its willingness to embrace both continuity and change as equally valid aspects of human experience. The philosophers who have wrestled with the Ship of Theseus over the centuries have proposed various solutions, each reflecting different assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The materialists who believe that physical substance is fundamental tend to favour the ship rebuilt from original parts. If identity lies in matter, they argue, then the authentic ship must be composed of the authentic materials, regardless of any breaks in continuity. The functionalists take a different approach, arguing that what makes something what it is has nothing to do with its particular physical components and everything to do with its role, its purpose, its pattern of behaviour. For them, the ship that maintained continuous service in the harbour, regardless of how many parts were replaced, has the stronger claim to authenticity because it never stopped being a ship, never stopped serving its essential function. Still others, the narrativists, suggest that identity lies not in substance or function, but in story. The true ship of Theseus, they might argue, is whichever vessel better embodies the ongoing story of heroism, preservation, and cultural memory that gives the ship its meaning. This ship exists as much in the collective imagination of the Athenians as in any particular arrangement of wood and rope. Each perspective offers its own wisdom, its own way of understanding how things persist through time. Yet perhaps the most profound insight comes not from choosing between these approaches, but from recognizing that they might all be partially true, that identity itself might be more multifaceted than any single theory can capture. This multiplicity of valid perspectives appears throughout our experience of identity and change. You are simultaneously the collection of atoms that compose your body, the pattern of thoughts and memories that constitute your mind, the set of relationships that define your social existence, and the ongoing story that gives your life coherence and meaning. Each lens reveals something true about who you are, yet none captures the full picture. Consider how this plays out in the realm of personal growth and self-improvement. The popular notion that we must find ourselves or discover our authentic selves assumes that identity is something fixed, waiting to be uncovered like buried treasure. But the Ship of Theseus suggests a different possibility, that authenticity might be less about discovering a pre-existing self and more about consciously participating in the ongoing process of becoming. From this perspective, the question isn't, who am I really, but rather, who am I becoming? And how can I participate consciously and ethically in that process of becoming? The changes you make in your life, the habits you develop, the relationships you cultivate, the beliefs you examine and sometimes revise. These aren't departures from your authentic self, but expressions of it. This understanding can transform how we relate to our own personal histories, the mistakes you made, the paths you didn't take, the versions of yourself that you've outgrown. These aren't failures or betrayals of some ideal self. They're integral parts of the ongoing process that has brought you to this moment, this understanding, this capacity for reflection and choice. Even our regrets take on a different quality when viewed through the lens of the Ship of Theseus. The person who made that decision you now wish you could undo was authentically you, operating with the knowledge, emotional resources, and circumstances available at the time. The person who regrets that decision is also authentically you, informed by additional experience and perspective. Both are valid expressions of your ongoing identity. This doesn't mean that all choices are equally good or that personal responsibility becomes meaningless. Rather, it suggests that responsibility includes not just accountability for past actions, but active participation in the ongoing process of becoming. You're responsible not just for who you've been, but for who you're becoming. Not just for preserving some essential core, but for consciously evolving in directions that align with your deepest values and aspirations. The Ship of Theseus also illuminates our relationship with tradition and innovation. Cultures face versions of this puzzle constantly. How to honour their heritage while adapting to changing circumstances. How to preserve what's valuable from the past while remaining open to new possibilities. The most vibrant traditions aren't those that resist all change, but those that change in ways that preserve and express their essential spirit. Think about language itself. English today is dramatically different from the English spoken 500 years ago, yet it maintains enough continuity that we can still read Shakespeare with effort and delight. The language has evolved through countless individual choices by millions of speakers, each adding their own small innovations while maintaining connection to the larger linguistic community. It's simultaneously ancient and modern, traditional and revolutionary, the same language and a completely different one. This dynamic appears in families as well. The traditions passed down through generations, the holiday customs, the ways of preparing certain foods, the stories told and retold, these evolve with each iteration while maintaining their essential character. Your grandmother's recipe for apple pie modified slightly by your mother, and perhaps again by you, is it the same recipe? The answer depends on what you think makes a recipe itself, but perhaps the more interesting question is how it manages to be both faithfully preserved and creatively transformed. The Ship of Theseus invites us to see this kind of creative preservation everywhere. In music, where jazz musicians honour tradition precisely by innovating within it. In architecture, where contemporary buildings can be thoroughly modern while somehow capturing the spirit of classical forms. In relationships, where couples grow and change over decades while maintaining the essential bond that first brought them together. Perhaps what we're really exploring is the nature of love itself. When you love someone, what exactly are you loving? Their current form, with all its particular quirks and limitations, they might become, the history potential you see in them, the person you share, the accumulation of moments and experiences that bind you together. The answer, the Ship of Theseus suggests, might be all of these and none of them, something that encompasses change while transcending any particular manifestation. This understanding can deepen our capacity for both self-acceptance and personal growth. If you are like the Ship of Theseus, continuously renewed while remaining essentially yourself, then you can embrace change without fear of losing your identity. You can grow, learn, evolve, even transform dramatically, while trusting that something essential will persist, something that makes all these changes expressions of, rather than departures from your authentic self. The puzzle also offers comfort in times of loss and grief. When someone we love changes in ways that seem to threaten their fundamental identity, through illness, aging, or simply the natural evolution of life, the Ship of Theseus reminds us that continuity and change can coexist. The person we're grieving may be both gone and still present, both lost and still found, both different and still recognizably themselves. This paradox appears poignantly in cases of memory loss or dementia, where the question of personal identity becomes heartbreakingly concrete. Is Alzheimer's still the same individual the person with who raised you, who shared decades of your life, who shaped your understanding of love and commitment? The Ship of Theseus doesn't offer easy answers, but it does suggest that identity might be more resilient and mysterious than we typically assume, existing not just in memory and recognition, but in deeper patterns of being that persist, even when surface continuities are disrupted. As you continue to rest there in the gentle darkness, you might notice that your own relationship with these ideas is changing even as you consider them. The thoughts you had about identity when we first began this exploration have evolved, been modified by new considerations, challenged by different perspectives. Yet somehow, you remain recognizably yourself throughout this process of intellectual and perhaps emotional transformation. This is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the Ship of Theseus puzzle, the way it demonstrates its own truth even as we contemplate it. We are all ships being constantly rebuilt, minds being continuously renewed, selves being perpetually transformed. Yet here we are, undeniably present, recognizably ourselves, capable of reflection and growth, and the kind of deep questioning that makes us most fully human. The ancient Greeks who first pondered this puzzle couldn't have imagined the scientific understanding we now have of how thoroughly our bodies replace themselves, how dynamically our brains rewire themselves, how constantly our cells die and are reborn. Yet they intuited something profound about the nature of identity and change that remains relevant, even urgent, in our contemporary world. In an age of rapid technological change where artificial intelligence challenges our understanding of consciousness, where genetic engineering makes the modification of a life itself possible, where virtual reality blurs the boundaries between authentic and simulated experience, the questions raised by the Ship of Theseus become more, rather than less, pressing. What makes us human when so much about us can be altered? What persists when everything changes? How do we maintain continuity of value and meaning in a world of constant transformation? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They're practical concerns that affect how we make decisions about medical treatment, genetic modification, artificial enhancement of human capabilities. They influence how we think about conservation and development, tradition and progress, personal growth and social change. But perhaps their most immediate relevance lies in the quiet moments like this one, when we have space to reflect on the miracle of our own existence, the mystery of our own continuity, the wonder of being conscious beings capable of questioning our own nature. The Ship of Theseus offers us a gentle way into these deep waters, a puzzle that's complex enough to engage our finest thinking, yet accessible enough to ponder as we drift towards sleep. The puzzle deepens when we consider not just our individual identity, but our collective ones. Think about the communities you belong to, the groups that have shaped your sense of belonging and purpose, your family perhaps, which has welcomed new members through birth and marriage while saying goodbye to others through death and distance. The core relationships may have shifted entirely over decades, yet something essential about your family's character, its values, its particular way of being in the world, seems to persist across generations. Or consider your workplace, your neighbourhood, your circle of friends. These communities breathe and change like living organisms, constantly incorporating new elements while releasing others. The coffee shop where you've been a regular for years may have changed owners, redesigned its interior, replaced its entire staff, yet somehow it still feels like your coffee shop. What makes it continuous with the place you first discovered? Is it the physical location, the ritual of your visits, the accumulated associations, or something more elusive? This question becomes particularly poignant when we think about institutions that span centuries, universities that have educated countless generations while completely transforming their curricula, their physical plants, their student bodies, their very understanding of what education means, religious communities that have evolved their interpretations of sacred texts while maintaining their essential spiritual purpose, political movements that have adapted their strategies and even their specific goals while preserving their deeper commitment to certain values. What makes these institutions themselves across such dramatic changes? The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps we're asking the wrong question when we focus on whether they remain the same. Perhaps the more interesting inquiry is how they manage to be both faithful and innovative, both rooted and growing, both traditional and revolutionary. This dynamic appears even in our most intimate relationships with ideas themselves. The beliefs that guide your life, the values that shape your decisions, the principles that define your character, these too undergo constant subtle revision. Your understanding of justice, of love, of what constitutes a meaningful life, has almost certainly evolved since you were younger. Yet these aren't typically experienced as betrayals of your former self, but as deepenings, refinements, more mature expressions of concerns that have always mattered to you. Perhaps this is what wisdom looks like, the ability to hold beliefs lightly enough that they can grow, while firmly enough that they can guide. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that this isn't a contradiction, but a necessity. If our values were completely rigid, they would shatter under the pressure of new experience. If they were completely fluid, they would provide no stability or direction. The art lies in finding the balance, the way of changing that preserves what's most essential while allowing for genuine growth and adaptation. This balance appears throughout the natural world in ways that can deepen our understanding of the puzzle. Consider the forest where you might have walked as a child. Every tree, every leaf, every creature within it has been replaced countless times over the decades. The very soil has been renewed through cycles of decay and regeneration. Yet something about the forest's essential character persists, something that makes it recognizable as the same place despite its complete material transformation. Ecologists speak of succession, the process by which ecosystems change over time while maintaining their fundamental structure and function. A meadow slowly becomes a forest through predictable stages, each phase giving way to the next while serving the larger pattern of ecological development. The meadow doesn't disappear when the first trees take root, nor does the forest betray the meadow when it reaches full maturity. Each stage is both a continuation and a transformation, both faithful to the past and creative of the future. This natural model offers another way of thinking about personal development and identity. Perhaps we too undergo succession, moving through predictable stages of growth, while maintaining our essential ecological niche in the larger community of life. The child doesn't disappear when adolescence begins, nor does the young adult vanish when maturity arrives. Each stage incorporates and transcends the previous ones, like the forest that carries the meadow's history in its soil, while reaching toward entirely new possibilities. But the Ship of Theseus also challenges us to consider what happens when change is more dramatic, less gradual. What about the sudden transformations that sometimes reshape a life completely? The spiritual awakening that reorders all priorities, the trauma that shatters previous assumptions about safety and meaning, the love that revolutionizes one's understanding of connection and commitment, the loss that fundamentally alters one's relationship with time and mortality. These watershed moments raise the puzzle's questions in their most acute form. When someone emerges from such experiences saying, "I'm not the same person I was before," are they speaking metaphorically or literally? And which version of themselves, if either, deserves to be called more authentic, the person who entered the experience or the one who emerged from it? The traditional approach might be to argue that one version represents the real self, while the other is somehow false or incomplete. But the Ship of Theseus opens up a different possibility, that both versions might be equally authentic expressions of a self that's large enough to encompass such dramatic change. Perhaps authenticity lies not in consistency, but in the courage to become whoever we're called to become, even when that calling leads us far from where we started. This perspective can transform how we relate to our own personal histories, especially the chapters we'd rather forget or rewrite. The mistakes you made, the relationships that ended badly, the opportunities you missed or mishandled, these aren't departures from your true path, but integral parts of the journey that has brought you to this moment of reflection. The person who made those choices was authentically you, operating with the resources and understanding available at the time. Recognizing this doesn't eliminate regret or absolve responsibility, but it does offer a different relationship with both. Instead of seeing past mistakes as evidence of some fundamental flaw or failure, we can view them as necessary elements in the ongoing process of becoming. The ship of your life has required the replacement of many parts over the years, some through natural wear, others through storms that demanded emergency repairs. Each replacement has been part of the process of remaining seaworthy, maintaining your ability to navigate whatever waters lie ahead. This understanding extends to how we hold our future possibilities as well. If you are like the Ship of Theseus, continuously renewed, while remaining essentially yourself, then the person you might become isn't a stranger waiting somewhere ahead, but a potential already present within you, like the forest already somehow implicit in the meadow. Your future self isn't someone you need to discover or create from scratch, but someone you can collaborate with, someone whose emergence you can participate in consciously and ethically. The puzzle also illuminates our relationship with memory and nostalgia. When you remember your childhood home, complete with its particular smells and sounds and the quality of light falling through familiar windows, what exactly are you remembering? The physical structure has likely changed, been renovated, or perhaps even demolished. The people who filled it with life have moved on or aged beyond recognition. Even your own capacity to perceive and interpret has been completely transformed by decades of experience. Yet the memory feels vivid and true, more real in some ways than many present experiences. The Ship of Theseus suggests that this isn't a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be appreciated. Perhaps memory isn't primarily about preserving the past, but about maintaining connection with the ongoing story of which that past is a part. When you remember your childhood home, you're not just recalling a building, but honouring the continuity that connects who you were then with who you are now. This continuity isn't threatened by change, but expressed through it. The adult who remembers the child is both the same person and completely different, just as the restored ship is both identical to and distinct from the original vessel. The beauty lies not in resolving this paradox, but in learning to live comfortably within it. As you rest there in the quiet darkness, you might notice that even your relationship with these ideas is demonstrating the puzzle's central insight. The understanding you have now of identity and change has been shaped by everything you've encountered in this exploration, yet it remains recognizably your understanding, filtered through your particular history, concerns, and ways of making meaning. You are both the same person who began listening and someone subtly transformed by the journey. This is perhaps the most practical gift the Ship of Theseus offers us. Permission to embrace both continuity and change without feeling we must choose between them. You can honour your past without being imprisoned by it. You can grow and evolve without losing touch with your roots. You can love someone through all their changes while trusting that something essential about them will persist. You can commit to values and purposes that matter deeply while remaining open to new understanding and growth. The ancient philosophers who first pondered this puzzle were, in their way, wrestling with the same fundamental questions that occupy us in our quieter moments. How do we make sense of a world where everything changes yet something seems to endure? How do we find stability in flux, continuity in transformation, meaning in the midst of constant becoming? Their answer, preserved for us across millennia through countless retellings and reinterpretations, each one slightly different yet essentially the same, is both humble and profound. They don't offer a solution but an invitation, a way of questioning that opens up rather than closes down, that deepens rather than simplifies our relationship with mystery. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that some of the most important questions don't have final answers, but rather offer ongoing opportunities for reflection and wonder. The puzzle isn't meant to be solved once and put aside, but to be lived with, returned to, explored from new angles as we ourselves change and grow. This is why it remains relevant after more than 2,000 years, why it continues to surface in late-night conversations and quiet moments of reflection. It speaks to something fundamental about the human condition, our experience of being continuous yet changing, permanent yet temporary, individual yet connected to larger patterns and purposes that extend far beyond our particular existence. In our age of rapid change and technological transformation, when the pace of alteration in our world seems to accelerate constantly, the Ship of Theseus offers both comfort and challenge. Comfort in recognizing that change and continuity have always been partners rather than enemies, that transformation is not only compatible with identity, but necessary for its full expression. Challenge in asking us to participate consciously in the ongoing process of becoming, both individually and collectively. The puzzle invites us to see ourselves not as fixed entities struggling against change, but as dynamic processes, patterns of relationship and meaning that maintain their essential character precisely through their capacity to grow and adapt. Like melodies that remain recognizable through variations in tempo, key and instrumentation, we persist not despite our changes but because of our to change in ways that express rather than betray our deepest nature. This understanding can transform how we approach the inevitable transitions and transformations that life brings. Instead of seeing change as a threat to be resisted or a problem to be solved, we can recognize it as an opportunity to participate more fully in the ongoing miracle of existence. Each ending becomes a beginning, each loss an opening for something new, each challenge an invitation to discover resources and capacities we didn't know we possessed. The Ship of Theseus doesn't promise that this process will be easy or comfortable. Growth often requires us to let go of familiar versions of ourselves, to release attachments to particular ways of being that no longer serve our highest possibilities. But it does suggest that we can trust the process, that something essential will persist through even the most dramatic transformations, something that makes all our changes expressions of rather than departures from our authentic selves. As the night deepens around you and your breathing begins to slow and settle, you might find yourself returning to the image of that ancient ship, rocking gently in the harbour after its long journey. Whether it's the same vessel that carried Theseus home or something entirely new, it remains beautiful, functional, worthy of honour and care. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the questions matter more than the answers, the wondering more than the knowing, the gentle rocking more than any final destination. The Ship of Theseus extends its gentle questioning into the realm of our relationships with others, asking us to consider what it means to truly know someone when they, like us, are constantly changing. Think of someone you've known for many years, perhaps a friend from childhood or a family member who has been part of your life story from the beginning. When you first met them, they were one version of themselves, shaped by the experiences and understanding they had at that time. Today, they are undeniably different, marked by years of growth, challenge, loss, and discovery. Yet when you look at them, you see not just who they are now, but layers of who they've been, shadows of earlier selves that somehow persist within their current form. The shy child still visible in moments of uncertainty, the teenager's passionate convictions echoing in their adult principles, the young person's dreams transformed but not abandoned in their mature aspirations. Which version is the real person? The one you first knew, the one sitting before you now, or some composite of all their iterations across time? This question becomes particularly poignant in romantic relationships, where couples often speak of falling in love with someone all over again as they change and grow. The person you married, if you are married, is not the same person sharing your bed tonight. Their body has aged, their thoughts have evolved, their dreams have been refined by reality, their understanding of love itself has deepened through the experience of loving and being loved. Yet something persists that makes your love continuous, something that connects all their various selves into a coherent identity worthy of lifelong devotion. Perhaps love itself is a kind of answer to the Ship of Theseus puzzle. When we truly love someone, we love not just their current configuration, but their capacity for change, their potential for growth, their essential nature that expresses itself differently across time and circumstance. We love the pattern rather than the parts, the melody rather than the individual notes, the story rather than any particular chapter. This understanding can transform how we navigate the inevitable changes that occur in long-term relationships. Instead of mourning the loss of earlier versions of our partners or feeling threatened by their growth, we can learn to love them through their transformations, recognizing that change is not a departure from who they are, but an expression of their deepest vitality. The person who grows and evolves is more authentically themselves than one who remains static, more worthy of love than one who resists the natural process of becoming. But the Ship of Theseus also challenges us to consider what happens when change seems to threaten the very foundation of a relationship. What about the friend who develops beliefs that seem incompatible with everything you once shared? The family member whose life choices feel like a betrayal of the values that once bound you together? The partner whose growth takes them in directions that no longer align with your own journey? These are the moments when the puzzle's questions become most pressing and most difficult. Are these people still the same individuals you once knew and loved? At what point, if any, does change become so profound that it severs the threads of continuity that connect past and present selves? The Ship of Theseus offers no easy answers, but it does suggest that perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking whether someone is still the same person, we might ask how we can honor both continuity and change in our relationships, how we can remain loyal to the essential bond while allowing space for transformation, how we can love people not despite their changes but because of their courage to grow, even when that growth leads them away from familiar shores. This perspective requires a kind of faith, a trust in something deeper than surface continuity. It asks us to believe that the connections that matter most are resilient enough to survive transformation, that love is strong enough to bridge even significant changes in those we care about. It doesn't guarantee that all relationships will endure every possible change, but it does suggest that the relationships worth preserving those that can accommodating are precisely growth and evolution. The puzzle extends to our relationship with collective memory and cultural inheritance. Consider the traditions that have shaped your understanding of celebration, grief, meaning, and purpose. The holiday customs passed down through generations, the stories told and retold around family tables, the practices that connect you to something larger than yourself. These traditions are never exactly the same from one generation to the next. Each family adds their own variations, adapts to new circumstances, finds ways to honor the past while remaining relevant to the present. Your grandmother's way of celebrating may differ significantly from your mother's, which differs again from your own. Yet something essential persists, some thread of meaning and connection that makes these celebrations recognizably part of the same tradition. The Ship of Theseus asks us to consider what makes this continuity possible. Is it the specific actions performed, the particular foods prepared, the exact words spoken, or is it something more subtle, some spirit or intention that can express itself through various forms while maintaining its essential character? This question becomes particularly relevant in our contemporary world, where traditional practices often need to adapt to new realities. How do you honor your cultural heritage while living authentically in the present moment? How do you pass meaningful traditions to the next generation when their world is so different from the one that originally gave those traditions shape? The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps the answer lies not in preserving traditions unchanged, but in finding ways to let them evolve that honor their deepest purposes while meeting contemporary needs. Think about the stories that have shaped your understanding of what it means to be human, the myths and legends, the historical accounts, the family narratives that have been passed down through countless retellings. Each telling is slightly different, filtered through the teller's perspective, adapted for the audience's understanding, modified by the context in which it's shared. Yet these stories maintain their power to inspire, teach, and connect us to larger patterns of meaning. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that perhaps this is exactly how stories are meant to work, not as fixed artifacts preserved unchanged from the past, but as living traditions that maintain their vitality precisely through their capacity to adapt and grow. The story that cannot change is the story that dies, while the story that changes thoughtfully and purposefully can remain relevant across centuries and cultures. This understanding can change how we relate to our own life stories. The narrative you tell about your journey, your growth, your purpose and direction, this story necessarily evolves as you gain new experiences and perspectives. The meaning you find in past events shifts as you understand them from new vantage points. The lessons you've learned get refined and sometimes completely reinterpreted through the lens of additional experience, yet your story remains recognizably yours throughout these changes. Something persists that makes it continuous and coherent, even as details shift and meanings evolve. Perhaps what makes a life story authentic isn't its factual accuracy or its consistency, but its honesty about the process of becoming, its willingness to embrace both continuity and change as equally valid aspects of human experience. The puzzle also illuminates our relationship with knowledge itself. The things you know today, the skills you've developed, the understanding you've gained, these represent a kind of accumulation that seems to build upon itself over time. Yet neuroscience tells us that memories are not stored like files in a cabinet, but reconstructed each time we recall them. Every act of remembering is also an act of subtle revision, influenced by new experiences, changing perspectives, and evolving understanding. So what do you actually know? If your knowledge is constantly being revised, if your memories are being continuously reconstructed, if your understanding is perpetually evolving, in what sense can you claim to possess stable knowledge about anything? The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps this isn't a problem to be solved, but a feature to be appreciated. Perhaps knowledge, like identity itself, is not a fixed possession, but a dynamic process, a way of engaging with the world that remains valuable precisely because it can grow and adapt. This perspective, instead of seeing knowledge, can transform how we approach learning and education as something to be acquired and then possessed. We can understand it as something to be continuously renewed, refined, and applied in new contexts. The person who stops learning is like a ship that refuses maintenance, eventually becoming unable to navigate the changing waters of life. But the Ship of Theseus also raises questions about wisdom and experience. If you are constantly changing, if your knowledge is continuously being revised, what happens to the wisdom gained through years of living? Does experience accumulate meaningfully, or does each moment start fresh without reference to what came before? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that wisdom is not simply accumulated information, but a way of engaging with change itself. The wise person is not necessarily the one who knows the most facts, but the one who has learned how to navigate uncertainty, how to remain open to new understanding while maintaining connection to enduring values, how to change in ways that preserve what matters most while allowing for genuine growth. This kind of wisdom appears throughout the natural world in ways that can deepen our understanding of the puzzle. Consider how trees respond to changing seasons. Each year, they let go of their leaves, enter a period of dormancy, then burst forth with new growth. They are simultaneously the same tree and a renewed tree, maintaining their essential structure while completely refreshing their capacity to interact with light, air, and water. The tree doesn't mourn the loss of last year's leaves or resist the coming of winter. It participates fully in the cycle of death and renewal, understanding somehow that this cycle is not a threat to its identity, but the very means by which its identity is preserved and expressed. Perhaps this is a model for how we might approach our own cycles of change and renewal. Or think about how rivers maintain their identity while being composed entirely of flowing water. The Mississippi River. You might cross today contains none of the same water molecules that composed it yesterday, yet it remains recognizably the Mississippi. Its identity lies not in any particular collection of water, but in the pattern of flow, the relationship between banks, the accumulated sediment that shapes its course, the larger hydrological system of which it's a part. The river teaches us that identity can be maintained through flow rather than fixity, through dynamic relationship rather than static substance. Perhaps we too are more like rivers than like rocks. maintaining our essential character not despite change but through our capacity to change in ways that preserve what matters most while adapting to new circumstances. This understanding can offer comfort during periods of major life transition. When career changes, relationship shifts, health challenges, or simple aging seem to threaten your sense of who you are, the Ship of Theseus reminds you that identity is more resilient and mysterious than surface appearances suggest. The changes you're experiencing may be profound, but they're not necessarily departures from your authentic self. They may be expressions of that self's deepest nature, its capacity to grow and adapt while maintaining essential continuity. The puzzle also speaks to questions of legacy and influence. What do we leave behind when we pass through this world? If everything changes, if nothing remains exactly as we found it, in what sense do our lives matter beyond their immediate duration? The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps influence works more like the replacement of parts than like the creation of monuments. The people you've touched, the ideas you've shared, the love you've given, these don't remain unchanged in the lives they've affected. They become integrated into other people's ongoing processes of becoming, modified by their particular circumstances, combined with other influences expressed in new and often unrecognizable forms. Yet something of your essential contribution persists, woven into the larger pattern of human experience. Think about the teachers who have shaped your understanding, the friends who have influenced your values, the authors whose words have shifted your perspective. Their impact on you is not a fixed thing but a living process, continuously being renewed as you apply their insights in new contexts, share their wisdom with others, build upon their contributions in your own unique way. You are, in a sense, part of their ongoing legacy, a continuation of their influence in the world. And those who are touched by your life become part of your legacy, carrying forward something of your essential contribution, even as they transform it through their own experience and understanding. In this way, we all participate in something larger than ourselves, a kind of collective Ship of Theseus, where individual contributions become part of an ever-renewing whole. This perspective can change how we understand mortality and meaning. If your significance lies not in preserving some fixed version of yourself, but in contributing to the ongoing process of human becoming, then death becomes not an ending but a transition, not a failure to persist but a completion of your particular contribution to the larger pattern of existence. The Ship of Theseus doesn't promise immortality in any conventional sense, but it does suggest a kind of continuity that transcends individual existence. The patterns you've contributed to, the love you've shared, the growth you've facilitated in yourself and others, these become part of the ongoing story of consciousness itself, preserved not as static monuments, but as living influences that continue to shape the world long after your particular configuration has dissolved. As you rest there in the gentle darkness, you might sense yourself participating in this larger process even now. Your breathing is part of the atmospheric circulation that connects all life on Earth. Your thoughts are part of the collective human exploration of meaning and purpose that has continued for millennia. Your capacity for reflection and wonder is part of the universe's own process of coming to know itself. The Ship of Theseus ultimately asks us to consider whether we are separate entities struggling to maintain our individual boundaries against the tide of change, or whether we are expressions of something larger, patterns in the universal process of becoming that maintain their beauty precisely through their willingness to participate fully in transformation. This question doesn't demand a final answer but invites ongoing contemplation. As you drift towards sleep, you might find comfort in recognizing that you are both unique and universal, both individual and connected, both temporary and part of something eternal. The parts of you that seem most precious, your capacity for love, your ability to wonder, your potential for growth, these are not threatened by change but fulfilled through it. The ship in the harbour rocks gently on the tide, neither the same vessel that began its journey nor something entirely different, but a beautiful expression of continuity within change. Like that ancient ship, you too are always in motion, always being renewed, always becoming more fully yourself through the very process that seems to threaten your stability. In this understanding, there is both mystery and peace. Mystery because the nature of identity remains ultimately beyond complete comprehension, deeper than any analysis can fully capture. Peace because you need not solve the puzzle to live beautifully within it, need not understand the mechanics of becoming to participate gracefully in the process. The Ship of Theseus continues its eternal voyage, carrying not just the memory of ancient heroes, but the ongoing question of what it means to be anything at all in a world where everything changes. It invites you to join that voyage, to embrace both the journey and the destination, both the questions and the not knowing, both the self you've been and the self you're becoming. As consciousness begins to soften around the edges and the boundary between waking and sleeping grows thin, you might notice that even this transition demonstrates the puzzle's deepest truth. The person who falls asleep tonight will not be exactly the same person who awakens tomorrow morning, yet something essential will persist through that daily death and resurrection, something that makes your dreams your own, and your awakening a homecoming rather than an arrival in a foreign land. Sleep well, fellow traveller on the Ship of Theseus. May your dreams be filled with gentle transformations, and may you awaken renewed yet recognisably yourself, ready for another day of the beautiful paradox of being both permanent and temporary, both individual and universal, both the same and wonderfully, mysteriously different. The puzzle deepens when we consider the nature of consciousness itself. As you lie there in the quiet darkness, your mind processing these ideas about identity and change, you might wonder, what exactly is this consciousness that seems to observe the constant flux of your thoughts and experiences? Is your awareness itself subject to the Ship of Theseus paradox, or does it represent something more stable, more enduring? Throughout the day, your consciousness flows through countless states. The focused attention you bring to work problems, the relaxed awareness of a pleasant conversation, the absorbed state of reading a compelling book, the dreamy half-attention of a long car ride. Each state feels distinctly different, coloured by different emotions, directed toward different objects, operating at different levels of clarity and intensity. Yet something seems to witness all these changes, something that remains recognisably you across all these shifting states of mind. When you remember being absorbed in that book last week, it's the same consciousness that recalls the experience as the one that originally lived it. But is it really the same? Or is this sense of continuity itself an illusion, a story your mind tells to create coherence where none actually exists? Neuroscience suggests that consciousness itself is more like a river than a rock, a constantly changing flow of neural activity rather than a fixed observer sitting somewhere in your brain. The thoughts you're thinking right now are patterns of electrical activity that will be completely different in the next moment. The very neurons participating in your current experience are different from those that were active just seconds ago. Even the sense of being a unified self, of having a single continuous stream of consciousness, appears to be constructed moment by moment by your brain's remarkable capacity to weave disparate experiences into a coherent narrative. What you call your consciousness might be more like a symphony than a single instrument, a harmonious coordination of multiple processes rather than one simple, unchanging awareness. This understanding can be both unsettling and liberating. Unsettling because it challenges our most basic assumption about ourselves, the sense that there's a consistent I experiencing our lives. Liberating because it suggests that the boundaries of self might be more flexible than we typically imagine, that consciousness itself might be more creative and adaptive than we usually recognize. Think about how your awareness changes as you move through different environments. The quality of consciousness you experience in a cathedral feels different from what you experience in a crowded marketplace, which differs again from what you experience in a quiet forest. These aren't just different contents within the same container of consciousness. They seem to be different types of consciousness altogether, different ways of being aware. Yet somehow you recognize all of these as your consciousness, your way of experiencing the world. Perhaps this is because consciousness, like the Ship of Theseus, maintains its identity not through unchanging substance, but through recognizable patterns, characteristic ways of organizing and interpreting experience that persist even as the specific contents constantly change. This perspective opens up intriguing possibilities about the nature of personal growth and transformation. If consciousness itself is fluid and adaptable, then the changes you undergo in therapy, meditation, education, or simply through life experience might represent not just changes in what you think about, but changes in how you're capable of being conscious, how you're able to be aware. The person who has learned to meditate doesn't just know something new about meditation, they've developed a new capacity for consciousness itself, a new way of being aware that wasn't available before. The individual who has worked through trauma hasn't just resolved particular psychological issues, they've expanded their range of possible conscious states, their repertoire of ways to be present in the world. From this perspective, personal development becomes not just a matter of changing your thoughts or behaviors, but of literally evolving your consciousness, developing new capacities for awareness that allow you to engage with reality in richer, more flexible, more creative ways. You become not just someone who thinks differently, but someone who is conscious differently. This understanding can transform how you relate to your own mental and emotional experiences. Instead of seeing difficult emotions or challenging thoughts as problems to be solved or eliminated, you might recognize them as opportunities to develop new capacities for consciousness, accommodate a wider range of human, new ways of being aware that can experience. The anxiety you feel before an important presentation isn't just an obstacle to overcome, it's an invitation to develop the capacity to be conscious in the presence of uncertainty. The grief you experience after a loss isn't just pain to be endured, it's an opportunity to discover new depths of love and connection that you didn't know were possible. The confusion you feel during major life transitions isn't just a temporary inconvenience, it's a chance to develop tolerance for not knowing, comfort with ambiguity. Each challenging experience becomes a kind of consciousness training, an opportunity to expand your repertoire of ways to be aware. Like the Ship of Theseus being constantly renewed through the replacement of worn parts, your consciousness is continuously being upgraded through the integration of new experiences, new challenges, new possibilities for awareness. This process isn't always comfortable. Just as replacing parts of a ship might temporarily compromise its stability, expanding your consciousness often involves periods of uncertainty, confusion, or disorientation. The familiar ways of being aware that once felt adequate may no longer serve your evolving understanding. You might find yourself between identities, no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. These transitional periods can feel frightening, like being adrift at sea without a reliable vessel, but the Ship of Theseus reminds us that such periods of uncertainty are not breakdowns, but breakthroughs, not endings, but beginnings. The consciousness that emerges from these transitions is both continuous with what came before and genuinely new, both recognizably yours and surprisingly different. Consider how this applies to the process of aging. As you move through different life stages, your consciousness itself evolves, developing new capacities while perhaps releasing others. The intense, passionate awareness of youth gives way to more reflective, nuanced forms of consciousness in middle age, which may evolve into the wisdom and acceptance that can characterize later life. Each stage offers its own gifts and challenges, its own ways of being conscious that are both valuable and temporary. The consciousness you inhabit today is both a continuation of your younger self's awareness and something entirely new, shaped by decades of experience into forms that your younger self couldn't have imagined. This evolution isn't a loss, but a transformation, not a diminishment, but a deepening. The Ship of Theseus suggests that trying to preserve consciousness unchanged would be not just impossible, but impoverishing. Growth requires change, and change, when embraced consciously, becomes growth. The puzzle also illuminates the nature of relationships and how consciousness can be shared and co-created. When you're in deep conversation with someone you love, something remarkable happens to the boundaries of individual consciousness. Your awareness begins to synchronize with theirs, your thoughts building on each other's ideas, your emotions resonating in harmony or productive tension. In these moments, it becomes unclear where your consciousness ends and theirs begins. You might find yourself thinking thoughts that feel both entirely your own and clearly influenced by the other person's perspective. You might experience emotions that seem to arise from the space between you, rather than from within either individual consciousness. The shared consciousness isn't a loss of individual identity, but an expansion of it, a demonstration that the boundaries of self might be more permeable and creative than we typically assume. You remain recognizably yourself throughout such experiences, yet you also become part of something larger, a collective awareness that encompasses and transcends individual perspectives. Perhaps this is what love actually is at its deepest level, not just an emotion or commitment, but a willingness to allow your consciousness to be transformed through intimate contact with another's awareness. The person who loves deeply doesn't just maintain their individual identity while relating to someone else. They discover new capacities for consciousness that emerge only through the relationship itself. This understanding can change how you approach not just romantic relationships, but all forms of human connection. Every meaningful encounter becomes an opportunity for consciousness expansion, a chance to discover new ways of being aware through contact with different perspectives, experiences, and ways of understanding the world. The colleague who challenges your assumptions, the child who sees the world with fresh eyes, the elderly person who carries decades of accumulated wisdom, each offers unique opportunities to expand your own conscious capacities. By remaining open to these influences while maintaining your essential identity, you participate in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. The Ship of Theseus also speaks to the relationship between individual and collective consciousness. Just as you're both continuous with your past selves and constantly changing, human consciousness as a whole seems to maintain certain essential characteristics while continuously evolving through the accumulated insights and experiences of countless individuals. The capacity for language, for abstract thought, for moral reasoning, for artistic creation, these appear to be stable features of human consciousness that have persisted across cultures and centuries. Yet the specific ways these capacities are expressed continue to evolve, shaped by new technologies, social structures, environmental challenges, and creative discoveries. You're both a product of this collective evolution and a contributor to it. The consciousness you've developed through your unique combination of experiences, relationships, and reflections becomes part of the larger pool of human awareness, influencing others through your words, actions, and very presence in ways you may never fully recognize. When you develop greater capacity for compassion, you contribute to the overall compassionate potential of human consciousness. When you learn to think more clearly or creatively, you add to the collective intellectual resources of our species. When you discover new ways of finding meaning and purpose, you expand the range of possibilities available to others who are struggling with similar questions. This interconnectedness suggests that personal growth and collective evolution are not separate processes but different aspects of the same larger transformation. The work you do to expand your own consciousness, to become more aware, more loving, more wise, ripples outward in ways that support the growth of consciousness everywhere. From this perspective, the question of whether you remain the same person through all your changes becomes less important than the question of how you can participate most fully in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. Instead of trying to preserve some fixed version of yourself, you can focus on developing whatever capacities for awareness will best serve both your individual flourishing and the larger project of consciousness awakening to its own nature and potential. This doesn't mean losing your individuality or becoming absorbed into some impersonal collective. Rather, it suggests that your unique perspective and experience are valuable precisely because they contribute something irreplaceable to the larger tapestry of awareness. Like instruments in an orchestra, individual consciousness maintains their distinct voices while participating in harmonies that transcend what any single awareness could create alone. As you continue to rest there in the gentle darkness, you might notice how your own consciousness is demonstrating these principles even now. The awareness that began listening to these ideas has been subtly transformed by the process of consideration and reflection. New connections have formed, fresh perspectives have emerged, different questions have begun to surface, yet you remain recognizably yourself throughout this process of mental transformation. The consciousness that will eventually drift into sleep tonight is both continuous with and different from the one that first began exploring these questions. Tomorrow's awakening will bring yet another subtle evolution, another gentle renovation in the ongoing construction project that is your conscious life. The Ship of Theseus ultimately invites us to embrace this process rather than resist it, to participate consciously in our own becoming, rather than trying to maintain some imagined state of unchanging identity. It suggests that the most authentic way to be yourself is to remain open to transformation, to allow your consciousness to grow and evolve in response to new experiences while maintaining connection to whatever feels most essential and enduring about your deepest nature. This balance between change and continuity, between individual identity and collective participation, between personal growth and universal connection, represents perhaps the most profound challenge and opportunity of conscious life. The Ship of Theseus doesn't solve this challenge but offers a framework for living creatively within it, for finding beauty and meaning in the very uncertainty that might otherwise feel threatening. In the end, the puzzle reminds us that consciousness itself might be less like a thing we possess, and more like a process we participate in, less like a fixed identity we must defend, and more like a creative capacity we can continuously develop. The question isn't whether we remain the same through all our changes, but how we can change in ways that honour both our individual uniqueness and our participation in the larger evolution of awareness itself. As sleep begins to call more insistently, and the boundaries between thoughts start to soften and blur, you might find comfort in recognizing that this daily transition into unconsciousness is itself a kind of Ship of Theseus experience. The person who falls asleep and the one who awakens are both the same and different, connected by threads of memory and identity that persist through the temporary dissolution of ordinary consciousness. Dreams will come and go, carrying fragments of the day's experiences into new and often surprising configurations. Upon awakening, you'll find yourself renewed yet recognizable, refreshed yet continuous, ready for another day of the beautiful, mysterious process of being consciously alive in a world where everything changes and nothing stays the same. Yet somehow, inexplicably, meaningfully, something essential always endures. The gentle rocking continues, the ship sails on through darkness toward dawn, and consciousness itself participates in the eternal dance between being and becoming, between identity and transformation, between the familiar shores of what we know and the undiscovered countries of what we might yet learn to see, to understand, to become. The Ship of Theseus finds perhaps its most intimate expression in the realm of creativity and the works we bring into being. Consider the poem you might write, revise and revise again until it bears little resemblance to its original form. Each draft replaces words, restructures lines, refines meanings, until what emerges might share only the initial impulse with what you first set down. Yet something persists through all these transformations, some essential vision or feeling that makes the final work recognizably yours, recognizably born from that first spark of inspiration. This creative process mirrors the larger mystery of identity we've been exploring. The artist who completes a work is not quite the same person who began it. The act of creation changes the creator, just as the work itself evolves through the process of making. Each brushstroke, each word choice, each moment of artistic decision both expresses and shapes the consciousness behind it. The finished painting is simultaneously a product of who you were and a catalyst for who you're becoming. Think about how this extends to all forms of human expression. The conversation you had this morning with a friend has changed you both in subtle ways. New ideas were introduced, different perspectives shared, emotional connections deepened or shifted. The words spoken cannot be taken back, but neither can they remain exactly as they were uttered. They live now in memory, where they continue to evolve through reflection and reinterpretation, influencing future conversations in ways both obvious and invisible. Even this exploration we're sharing demonstrates the puzzle's truth. The ideas we've been considering together are not fixed entities, but living thoughts that change through the very process of being contemplated. Your understanding of the Ship of Theseus now is different from what it was when we began, yet it remains recognizably the same philosophical puzzle. The concepts have been renewed through your engagement with them, just as your mind has been subtly transformed through the encounter. This dynamic relationship between observer and observed, between consciousness and its objects, reveals something profound about the nature of knowledge itself. We don't simply receive information passively, like empty vessels being filled. Instead, we actively participate in creating meaning through the very process of understanding. Each insight changes us, and our changed state of being then influences how we perceive and interpret future experiences. The implications extend far beyond individual learning to encompass the entire human project of making sense of existence. Science progresses not just through the accumulation of facts, but through the continuous revision of understanding as new observations challenge old assumptions. What we call scientific knowledge is itself a kind of Ship of Theseus, maintaining continuity of method and purpose, while constantly updating its specific claims about how the world works. Yesterday's certainties become today's approximations, which may become tomorrow's quaint misconceptions. Yet something persists through all these revisions, some commitment to truth-seeking and evidence-based reasoning that makes contemporary science recognizably connected to the investigations of ancient natural philosophers even as the specific content has been revolutionized countless times. This perspective can transform how we relate to our own beliefs and convictions. Instead of seeing changes in your worldview as failures of consistency or betrayals of your former self, you might recognize them as evidence of intellectual vitality, proof that your mind remains open to new evidence and better reasoning. The person who never changes their mind may appear admirably steadfast, but they might also be demonstrating a kind of intellectual rigidity that prevents growth and learning. The Ship of Theseus suggests that wisdom lies not in defending fixed positions, but in maintaining the capacity to evolve your understanding while preserving whatever insights have proven most valuable. Your core values might deepen and refine themselves over time without losing their essential character. Your fundamental commitments might find new expressions without abandoning their underlying purposes. Consider how this applies to moral development. The ethical framework that guides your decisions today has likely evolved significantly from what shaped your choices in earlier years. You may have moved from rule-based thinking to more nuanced considerations of context and consequence. Your understanding of justice, compassion, and responsibility has probably been refined through experience, education, and reflection. Yet something persists through all these moral evolutions, some underlying concern for doing right that connects your current ethical sense with your earlier attempts at goodness. You haven't become a different moral agent so much as a more sophisticated version of the same basic commitment to living well and treating others with appropriate care and respect. This understanding can offer comfort during periods of moral uncertainty or conflict. When faced with difficult ethical decisions, you need not start from scratch, as if you had no relevant experience or wisdom. Instead, you can draw upon the accumulated moral insights of your past selves while remaining open to new considerations that might require you to adjust or expand your understanding. The puzzle also illuminates the nature of suffering and healing. When someone experiences trauma, the impact often feels like a fundamental alteration of identity. The person who emerges from a serious illness, a profound loss, or a life-threatening experience may feel disconnected from who they were before. Friends and family sometimes struggle to recognize them, and they may struggle to recognize themselves. Yet healing often involves not a return to some previous state, but a creative integration that honors both the continuity of identity and the reality of transformation. The person who has suffered deeply is not the same as they were before, nor should they be expected to be. Instead, they may discover new capacities for empathy, resilience, and appreciation that weren't available in their pre-trauma state. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that such transformations need not be seen as losses of authentic selfhood, but as potentially profound expansions of what it means to be human. The survivor of serious illness may develop a relationship with mortality that enriches every subsequent day. The person who has grieved deeply may discover reservoirs of love they never knew they possessed. The individual who has faced their deepest fears may find freedoms they couldn't have imagined before. This doesn't minimize the reality of suffering or suggest that trauma is somehow beneficial. Rather, it offers a framework for understanding how identity can persist through even the most challenging transformations, how continuity and change can coexist even in the most difficult circumstances. The perspective also applies to collective healing and social transformation. Communities that have experienced historical trauma face versions of the Ship of Theseus puzzle as they work toward healing and justice. How do they honor the memory of what was lost while building something new? How do they maintain continuity with their cultural heritage while adapting to changed circumstances? The most successful efforts at collective healing seem to involve a creative balance between preservation and transformation. Traditional practices get adapted to contemporary contexts. Ancient wisdom finds new expressions that speak to current challenges. Cultural identity maintains its essential character, while evolving to meet the needs of new generations living in different circumstances. This process requires both memory and imagination, both rootedness and flexibility. Like the Ship of Theseus, healthy communities seem to understand intuitively that survival depends not on rigid preservation, but on thoughtful adaptation, not on refusing all change, but on changing in ways that honor what matters most while remaining responsive to new realities. As you rest there in the quiet hours, you might notice how your own relationship with home and belonging demonstrates these principles. The place you call home may have changed dramatically over the years, through renovation, neighborhood transformation, or simply the natural processes of aging and decay. The people who made it feel like home may have moved away, grown up, or passed on. Even your own relationship with the space has evolved as your needs, preferences, and life circumstances have shifted. Yet something about home persists through all these changes, something that makes certain places feel like sanctuary even when everything visible has been altered. Perhaps it's the accumulated associations, the layered memories that give depth and meaning to physical spaces. Perhaps it's the patterns of relationship and care that continue, even as their specific expressions evolve. Or perhaps it's something more mysterious, some quality of belonging that transcends particular arrangements of people and objects. The Ship of Theseus suggests that home, like identity itself, might be less about specific components and more about ongoing relationships, less about fixed arrangements and more about persistent patterns of meaning and connection. The home that matters most might be the one you carry within yourself, the sense of belonging that travels with you and expresses itself wherever you choose to invest your care and attention. This understanding can be particularly comforting for those who have experienced displacement, whether through moving, loss, or life transitions that disrupt familiar patterns of belonging. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that home is not something we simply find or lose, but something we continuously create through our choices about where to invest our love and attention. The puzzle extends its gentle questioning into the realm of purpose and vocation as well. The work that gives your life meaning may have evolved significantly over time, from childhood dreams to educational pursuits to professional responsibilities to perhaps entirely different callings that emerged as you matured. The specific tasks you perform, the skills you've developed, even the fundamental goals you're working toward may have been replaced multiple times throughout your life. Yet something may persist through all these vocational changes, some underlying drive or commitment that makes your current work feel continuous with your deepest aspirations. Perhaps it's a desire to contribute to something larger than yourself, to develop and use your gifts in service of values you care about, to find expression for creativity and caring that feels authentic to who you are. The Ship of Theseus suggests that vocational authenticity might lie not in finding the one perfect job that matches some fixed identity, but in discovering how to bring your essential nature to whatever work you're called to do. The teacher who becomes a counselor, the engineer who becomes an artist, the business person who becomes a social activist, these aren't necessarily departures from authentic vocation, but potentially deeper expressions of underlying purposes that have found new outlets. This perspective can transform how you relate to career transitions and professional uncertainty. Instead of seeing changes in your work life as failures to find your true calling, you might recognize them as natural evolutions in your understanding of how to contribute meaningfully to the world. Each position, each project, each professional experience becomes part of an ongoing exploration of how to align your unique gifts with the needs and opportunities around you. The puzzle also speaks to the nature of commitment itself. When you make promises, whether to other people or to principles and causes you care about, what exactly are you committing to? If you're constantly changing, if circumstances continuously evolve, if your understanding of what you've committed to deepens and shifts over time, how do you honor commitments without becoming trapped by interpretations that may no longer serve their original purposes? Perhaps the most meaningful commitments are not to specific behaviors or outcomes, but to ongoing processes of engagement. When you commit to loving someone, you're not promising to feel exactly the same emotions forever, but to continue choosing to invest in their well-being and growth. When you commit to a cause, you're not necessarily binding yourself to particular strategies or tactics, but to ongoing engagement with the underlying values and purposes that give the cause its importance. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that the most enduring commitments might be those flexible enough to evolve while maintaining their essential character. Like the ship that remains seaworthy through constant maintenance and gradual renewal, commitments that last tend to be those that can adapt to changing circumstances while preserving whatever made them worth making in the first place. This understanding can deepen rather than threaten the significance of promises and vows. Instead of seeing them as rigid contracts that bind you to specific behaviors regardless of context, you might understand them as ongoing invitations to creative fidelity, opportunities to discover new ways of honoring your deepest values as circumstances change and understanding grows. Marriage vows, for instance, take on richer meaning when understood as commitments to grow together, rather than promises to remain unchanged. The people who marry are not the same individuals who celebrate their golden anniversary, yet something essential about their bond persists and deepens through all the transformations they experience together. Their commitment is renewed and expressed differently at each stage of life, while maintaining the fundamental choice to prioritize their shared journey. Professional commitments work similarly. The doctor who takes an oath to first do no harm must continually reinterpret what that means as medical knowledge advances, social contexts shift, and personal understanding deepens. The commitment remains constant while its specific applications evolve, creating space for both consistency and growth. As your breathing continues to slow and settle, you might find yourself returning to the question of what ultimately persists through all the changes we've been exploring. What is it that makes you recognizably you despite all the transformations you've undergone? What makes your relationships continuous despite all their evolutions? What makes your commitments meaningful despite all their adaptations? Perhaps the answer lies not in any particular content, but in the process itself. The ongoing dance between continuity and change that characterizes all living systems. You are neither a fixed entity struggling against transformation, nor a completely fluid process without stable identity. Instead, you might be something more beautiful and mysterious, a pattern of becoming that maintains its essential character precisely through its capacity to grow and adapt. This pattern expresses itself differently at each stage of life while remaining recognizably yours. The child's curiosity becomes the adult's wisdom. The teenager's passion matures into the elder's compassion. The young person's dreams transform into the mature person's contributions. Each stage is both a continuation and a renewal, both faithful to what came before and creative of what comes next. The Ship of Theseus ultimately invites us to see identity not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived. It suggests that the questions we've been exploring together don't require final answers, but offer ongoing opportunities for reflection and wonder. The puzzle persists across centuries not because philosophers have failed to solve it, but because it points towards something true about the nature of existence itself. Everything that matters to us exists in this space between being and becoming, between permanence and change, between individual identity and universal connection. We're all ships being constantly renewed, stories being continuously retold, songs being perpetually recomposed. The beauty lies not in reaching some final, unchanging state, but in participating consciously and creatively in the ongoing process of transformation. As consciousness begins to fade around the edges and the pull of sleep grows stronger, you might take comfort in recognizing that this daily transition itself demonstrates the puzzle's deepest wisdom. The person who falls asleep tonight will undergo a kind of temporary dissolution, a letting go of ordinary identity that allows for renewal and restoration. The one who awakens tomorrow morning will be both the same and different, refreshed yet continuous, ready for another day of the beautiful paradox of being human. The ancient ship continues its eternal voyage, carrying not just the memory of heroes but the ongoing questions that make us most fully alive. In its gentle rocking, we hear the rhythm of our own becoming, the endless dance between what we are and what we might yet become. The questions persist, the mystery deepens, and somewhere in the space and becoming, we find our between sleeping and waking, between being place, in the great story that includes us all. Rest well, fellow traveller. The ship sails on, the journey continues, and tomorrow brings new opportunities to explore the magnificent puzzle of existence. In your dreams tonight, may you find both the peace of belonging and the excitement of endless possibility, both the comfort of continuity and the joy of perpetual renewal. The Ship of Theseus extends its questioning into the very foundations of memory itself, inviting us to consider what happens when we try to hold on to experiences that seem to slip away even as we grasp for them. Think about your earliest memory, that first moment of conscious recollection that feels authentically yours. Perhaps it's a fragment of sunlight filtering through a window, the sound of your mother's voice calling your name, the taste of something sweet on your tongue. But here's the curious thing about that memory. Each time you recall it, you're not accessing some perfectly preserved recording stored unchanged in your mind. Instead, you're reconstructing it anew, influenced by everything you've learned and experienced since that original moment. The neural pathways that fire when you remember are different from those that first encoded the experience. The person doing the remembering has been shaped by decades of subsequent events that colour and reshape what you think you're preserving. So is it the same memory? The 5-year-old who first experienced that moment is gone, replaced by someone with an entirely different body, different knowledge, different emotional landscape. The brain that originally processed the experience has been completely renewed at the cellular level multiple times over. Even the meaning you derive from the memory has likely evolved, filtered through adult understanding of childhood, relationships, and the passage of time itself. Yet something persists, something that makes the memory feel genuinely yours, authentically connected to your personal history. When you close your eyes and return to that early moment, you don't feel like you're accessing someone else's experience or engaging in pure imagination. There's a quality of recognition, of homecoming, that suggests continuity despite all the changes that separate you from that original experience. This mystery of memory reveals something profound about how identity actually works in practice. We are not simply collections of fixed experiences stored like files in a cabinet. Instead, we are ongoing processes of remembering and forgetting, constantly reconstructing our sense of self through the stories we tell about our past. Each act of recollection is simultaneously preservation and creation, maintaining connection to what was while allowing it to become something new. Consider how this applies to the stories that define your sense of who you are. The narrative of your first day of school, your first heartbreak, your greatest triumph. These aren't just historical records, but living elements of your ongoing identity. Each time you share them, whether with others or in quiet reflection, they evolve slightly, gaining new emphasis, losing certain details, acquiring fresh layers of meaning through connection to subsequent experiences. This isn't a flaw in the system of memory, but perhaps its greatest feature. If our recollections were perfectly fixed, unchanging recordings of past events, they would become increasingly irrelevant to our present circumstances. Instead, the fluidity of memory allows our past to remain alive and meaningful, continuously informing our current choices and future aspirations in ways that rigid historical records never could. The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps authenticity lies not in preserving experiences unchanged, but in allowing them to grow and deepen through ongoing engagement. The memory that matters most might not be the one that maintains perfect fidelity to original events, but the one that continues to offer insight, comfort, or guidance as you navigate new challenges and opportunities. This understanding can transform how we relate to loss and nostalgia. When you miss someone who is no longer in your life, what exactly are you missing? The specific person as they existed at particular moments, or the ongoing relationship that allowed both of you to grow and change through your connection? The painful absence you feel might be not just for who they were, but for who they might have become, the conversations you'll never have, the shared experiences that will remain forever potential rather than actual. Yet something of that relationship persists in ways that transcend physical presence. The influence they had on your thinking, the love they awakened in your heart, the ways they helped shape your understanding of what it means to care for another person, these continue to live and evolve within you. In a sense, the relationship continues even after their physical departure, as you carry forward the gifts they gave you and allow them to influence how you connect with others. This perspective doesn't eliminate grief or make loss less painful, but it does suggest that what we mourn might be more complex than simple absence. We grieve not just for what was, but for what will never be allowed to become. We miss not only past experiences, but future possibilities. Yet we also carry forward something essential that death cannot touch, something that continues to grow and influence long after the original relationship has ended in its physical form. The puzzle deepens when we consider how this applies to our relationship with cultural inheritance and historical connection. The traditions that have shaped your worldview, the stories that have formed your imagination, the values that guide your decisions, these have been passed down through countless generations of transmission, each adding their own interpretation, emphasis, and understanding. The wisdom traditions that speak to you today, whether religious, philosophical, or cultural, are not identical to their original forms. They have evolved through centuries of interpretation, translation, adaptation to new circumstances, and integration with different cultural contexts. The Buddhism practiced in contemporary America differs significantly from what the Buddha taught in ancient India. The democracy you participate in bears only partial resemblance to what emerged in ancient Athens. The scientific method you learned in school has been refined and sophisticated far beyond what its early practitioners could have imagined. Yet something essential persists through all these transformations, something that makes contemporary expressions recognizably connected to their historical sources. The core insights about human suffering and liberation that inspired the Buddha continue to speak to modern practitioners, even as their specific applications have adapted to entirely different social and technological contexts. The fundamental commitment to collective decision-making that characterized early democratic experiments continues to inspire contemporary political movements, even as the mechanisms have evolved beyond recognition. Perhaps this is how living traditions actually work, not as museums preserving unchanged artifacts from the past, but as ongoing conversations between historical wisdom and contemporary need. The traditions that remain vital are those flexible enough to address new challenges while maintaining connection to the insights that originally gave them power and relevance. This understanding can change how you relate to your own cultural and spiritual heritage. Instead of seeing changes in religious practice, political belief, or cultural expression as departures from authentic tradition, you might recognize them as natural evolutions in the ongoing project of applying ancient wisdom to contemporary circumstances. The faith that adapts to new understanding isn't necessarily betraying its origins, but potentially fulfilling its deepest purposes. Even language itself demonstrates these principles in ways that illuminate the nature of meaning and communication. The words you're hearing right now have traveled through centuries of evolution, their meaning shifting and deepening through countless uses in different contexts by different speakers. The English we share bears only partial resemblance to what was spoken 500 years ago, yet it maintains enough continuity that we can still read Shakespeare with effort and delight. Each word carries within it layers of historical usage, cultural association, and personal meaning accumulated through your own experience with language. When you hear the word home, it evokes not just the dictionary definition, but the specific places, people, and feelings that have given that concept personal significance in your life. The meaning emerges from the intersection of shared linguistic heritage and individual experience, creating something both universal and intimately personal. This collaborative nature of meaning-making appears throughout human communication. When you have a conversation with someone you care about, you're not just exchanging information, but co-creating understanding through the dynamic interaction between your different perspectives, experiences, and ways of interpreting the world. The insights that emerge often surprise both participants, arising from the creative space between minds rather than from either individual consciousness alone. Perhaps this is what real intimacy looks like, not just the sharing of fixed information, but the willingness to allow your understanding to be transformed through genuine encounter with another's perspective. The conversations that matter most are often those that leave both participants somehow changed, carrying new possibilities for thought and feeling that weren't available before the exchange began. As you continue to rest there in the gentle darkness, you might notice how your own thinking has been subtly transformed through this extended contemplation of identity and change. The questions you're considering now are both the same ones we began with and entirely new, deepened through exploration, complicated by additional considerations, enriched by the accumulation of examples and implications. The Ship of Theseus puzzle itself has undergone a kind of renovation through our shared investigation. While the basic scenario remains unchanged, its meaning has been expanded and refined through application to different aspects of human experience. The ancient thought experiment has become something new, while remaining recognizably itself, demonstrating its own central insight through the very process of being examined. This reflexive quality appears throughout philosophy, where the act of thinking about thinking inevitably changes both the thinker and the thoughts being considered. You cannot engage seriously with questions of identity and change without becoming someone slightly different in the process, someone with new capacities for reflection and wonder that weren't available before the inquiry began. This transformation through inquiry extends to all forms of serious learning and growth. When you study history, you don't just acquire information about the past, but develop new ways of understanding how human societies function and change. When you learn a musical instrument, you don't just gain technical skills, but discover new capacities for expression and beauty that expand your emotional and aesthetic range. When you practice meditation or prayer, you don't just perform certain actions, but potentially develop new ways of being conscious, new relationships with thought and feeling that can transform your entire approach to living. Each genuine learning experience changes not just what you know, but who you are. Not just your information, but your very capacity to engage with the world. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that this isn't a side effect of learning, but perhaps its most essential feature. Education that leaves you fundamentally unchanged has failed in its deepest purpose, which is not just to fill your mind with facts, but to expand your possibilities for understanding and action. This understanding can transform how you approach the ongoing project of personal development. Instead of seeing growth as a matter of adding new skills or knowledge to a fixed core self, you might recognize it as a continuous process of becoming, an ongoing renovation of consciousness that maintains essential continuity while allowing for genuine transformation. The person who commits to learning, growing, and changing is like the Athenians caring for their sacred ship, constantly replacing worn or damaged elements while preserving whatever makes the vessel capable of navigating challenging waters. The specific skills, beliefs, and habits that served you well at earlier stages of life may need to be updated or replaced as you face new challenges and opportunities. Yet something essential persists through all these changes, something that makes your growth genuinely yours rather than a betrayal of your authentic nature. This process requires both courage and discernment, both openness to change and commitment to whatever feels most true and valuable about your deepest identity. The art lies in learning to distinguish between changes that enhance your essential nature and those that might compromise it, between growth that expresses your authentic self and adaptation that betrays your fundamental values. The Ship of Theseus offers no simple formula for making these distinctions, but it does suggest that the capacity to change thoughtfully and purposefully is itself one of the most valuable aspects of human nature. The person who can evolve while maintaining integrity, who can adapt while preserving authenticity, who can grow while honoring their roots, demonstrates a kind of wisdom that serves both individual flourishing and collective well-being. As your breathing continues to deepen and slow, you might find yourself appreciating the profound ordinariness of the transformations happening within you right now. Your body is continuously renewing itself at the cellular level. Your mind is processing and integrating the day's experiences. Your emotional and spiritual dimensions are quietly adjusting to new understanding and possibility. Yet you remain recognizably yourself throughout all these subtle changes, continuous with who you were this morning while open to who you might become tomorrow. This daily cycle of renewal and restoration demonstrates on a small scale the same principles we've been exploring in relation to longer-term identity and change. Sleep itself is a kind of Ship of Theseus experience, a temporary letting go of ordinary consciousness that allows for deeper forms of restoration and integration. The person who falls asleep and the one who awakens are both the same and different, refreshed by the mysterious processes that occur during unconsciousness, ready to continue the ongoing project of conscious existence with renewed energy and possibility. In your dreams tonight, you may find yourself exploring these questions in forms more fluid and imaginative than waking thought allows. The boundaries between self and other, between past and present, between possibility and actuality, become more permeable in the dream state, offering unique opportunities to experience directly the fluid nature of identity we've been contemplating intellectually. The Ship of Theseus continues its eternal voyage through the waters of philosophical inquiry, carrying not just the memory of ancient heroes, but the ongoing questions that make us most fully human. Its gentle rocking speaks to something fundamental about the nature of existence itself, the way everything meaningful persists not through rigid preservation, but through creative adaptation, not through resistance to change, but through conscious participation in the ongoing process of becoming. As consciousness begins to fade around the edges, and the day's concerns dissolve into the approaching peace of sleep, you might take comfort in recognizing that you are both the same person who woke up this morning and someone subtly transformed by the experiences, reflections, and possibilities that have filled the hours between. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities for growth, new challenges requiring adaptation, new possibilities for discovering who you might become while remaining authentically yourself. The ancient puzzle holds you gently in its embrace, reminding you that identity is both more fragile and more resilient than we typically imagine, both more mysterious and more reliable than our usual assumptions suggest. In the space between waking and sleeping, between being and becoming, between the self you know and the possibilities that await discovery, you find your place in the great story that includes us all. Rest well, fellow philosopher. The questions will be here when you return, patient and inexhaustible, offering endless opportunities for wonder and growth. The ship of your life continues its journey through the vast ocean of existence. Guided by stars you're still learning to read, carrying cargo you're still discovering, sailing toward horizons that remain beautifully, mysteriously unknown. The Ship of Theseus finds its most poignant expression in the quiet moments before sleep, when the day's accumulated experiences begin to settle into the deeper layers of memory and meaning. As you lie there in the gathering darkness, you might notice how your very relationship with consciousness itself demonstrates the puzzle's central mystery. The awareness that began this exploration feels both familiar and subtly transformed, like returning to a childhood home that has been lovingly maintained yet inevitably changed by the passage of time. Consider how the simple act of reflection alters what it contemplates. Each thought you've entertained tonight about identity and change has become part of your ongoing story, woven into the fabric of who you are in ways that will influence future moments of contemplation. The questions we've explored together haven't remained static objects of intellectual curiosity, but have become living elements of your consciousness, seeds that may sprout into new understanding during tomorrow's quiet moments, or perhaps in the fluid landscapes of dreams. This transformative quality of genuine inquiry reveals something beautiful about the nature of wisdom itself. True understanding doesn't simply add new information to an unchanged mind, but participates in the ongoing renovation of consciousness, gently replacing old assumptions with more nuanced perspectives, while preserving whatever insights have proven most valuable. The wise person isn't someone who has accumulated a vast collection of unchanging truths, but someone who has learned to think in ways that remain open to growth, while maintaining connection to enduring principles. Think about how this applies to the relationship between knowledge and wonder. As you've learned more about the world through education and experience, you might expect mystery to diminish, questions to be resolved, uncertainty to give way to clarity. Yet often the opposite occurs. The more deeply you understand any subject, the more aware you become of its complexity. The more questions emerge, the more appreciation you develop for how much remains unknown. This isn't a failure of learning, but perhaps its greatest gift. Education that kills wonder has missed its mark, while understanding that deepens appreciation for mystery serves both intellectual honesty and emotional richness. The child's naive questions may be replaced by more sophisticated inquiries, but something essential about the questioning spirit persists, refined rather than eliminated by accumulated knowledge. The Ship of Theseus suggests that perhaps this is how all genuine development works. We don't simply outgrow earlier versions of ourselves, but integrate and transcend them, carrying forward what serves while releasing what no longer fits. The adult who retains access to childlike wonder while possessing mature judgment demonstrates a kind of successful renovation of consciousness, maintaining essential capacities while developing new ones. And so we return to where we began, with an ancient ship rocking gently in the harbour, carrying within its weathered hull one of philosophy's most enduring invitations to wonder. The Ship of Theseus doesn't offer us answers so much as it offers us a way of seeing, a lens through which the entire world becomes more mysterious and more beautiful. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you carry with you not just a puzzle, but a perspective, not just questions, but a deeper appreciation for the magnificent uncertainty that makes existence itself possible. Sweet dreams, fellow traveller, and may you awaken tomorrow both exactly who you are and wonderfully, mysteriously different.